Welcome to the Advanced Business Research series. My name is Dr. Derajat Semma, and in this lecture we will be discussing the importance and purpose of the literature review to your research project. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to adapt a critically perspective view of your research. Know what you need to include when writing your critical review. You should be able to be aware of the range of primary, secondary, and tertiary literature sources available through various sources. Be able to identify keywords and to undertake a literature search using a range of search methods, and you will be able to evaluate the relevance, value, and sufficiency of the literature you found. Of course, you will be able to use the different standards available for writing your research paper, including the APA standards. And finally, you will be able to apply the knowledge, skills, and understanding gained to your own research project. Reviewing the literature critically will provide the foundation on which your research is built. Of course, its main purpose is to help you develop a good understanding and insight into relevant previous researches and the trends that have emerged. Of course, the precise purpose of your reading of the literature will depend on the approach you are intending to use in your research. For some research projects, you may use the literature just to help you understand theories and ideas that you will be testing your data. And this is known as a deductive approach, in which you, the researcher, develop a theoretical or conceptual framework which you subsequently test using data. On the other side, for other research projects, you may be planning to explore your data and to develop theories from them that you will subsequently relate to the literature. This approach is commonly known as an inductive approach, and although your research still has clearly defined purpose with research questions and objectives, you do not start with any predetermined theories or conceptual frameworks. But let's define what literature review is. Researchers kind of put it as a critical discussion and summary of statistical literature that is of general and specialized relevance to the particular area and topic of the research problem. This is just to say that your literature review would be the foundation for your research. You have to know the area, you have to know the body of knowledge in your research topic. You also have to know if those research area topics have already explored, if there is a relevant methods available for your topic, and of course if your research has been previously conducted or not. So it's important to do the literature review first before going to the next step. Why it is important to do literature review? Knowing that pretty much 1/3 of your research paper is literature review, means that the good chunk of your paper is is your literature review. So some people may ask that why is it's important. Of course, it's important because it describes how the proposed research is related to prior research in statistics. It shows the originality and relevance of the research problem, specifically your research, why your research is different from other, It's also help you to refine further your research questions and objectives. It highlights research possibilities that have been overlooked implicitly in the research to date. It also justifies your proposed methodology, what type of research methodology you're going to use, how extensive that methodology been used in the past, whether you have a very good or a valid instrument for your research. And it's also help to demonstrate your preparedness to complete the research. The other important relevance of your literature review in your research is it helps you to discover explicit recommendations for further research. This can provide researchers with a superb justification for why you need to do your research further. It also helps researchers to avoid simply repeating works that has been done already, which I tried to explain in the previous slides, and also help to discover and provide an insight into research approaches, strategies, and techniques that may be appropriate to your own research questions and objectives. Why it is difficult by many students, especially students who've never been conducted any literature review in the past, to go and then start, because as you begin to find, read, and evaluate the literature, one need to think how to combine the academic theories and ideas about which they are reading to form a critical review that will appear in the project report. So the review need to evaluate the research that has already been undertaken in the area of your research project, show and explain the relationship between published research finding and the reference in the literature in which they are reported. So at the beginning, it probably sounds daunting to connect the dots between the previously conducted research and the relevance for your topic. So students get challenged by to see those big pictures, because the literature review is one critical discussion, and is one important part on your research. Now the question is there a single way or a single approach for conducting the literature review? So the answer is no, but from experience and from the literature, one could pick a particular approach for going through the whole literature review, because it is, you're going into the unknown territory, and it's always good to have that GPS where you know where you're gonna go. For this lecture, I'm going to use the Harvard College Library recommendations that they put a couple of bullet points or outlines for their students to be able to practice for effective literature review. And these 4 steps are pre-reviewing, annotating, summarizing, comparing, and contrasting. So we're going to discuss each one of them in detail in the next couple of slides. So previewing means looking around the text before starting reading in order to establish precisely its purpose and how it may inform you as a research the literature review. There are 4 important steps, or 4 questions that you need to ask before you do your previewing or during the previewing process. Again, this is also this information is taken from those from that Harvard College library. And the first one is, first, throw away the highlighter in favor of a pen or pencil. Means that you're ready to write it down instead of to highlight. Highlighting can actually distract from the business of learning and dilute your comprehension. It only seems like an active reading strategy, but in actual fact, it can lull you into a dangerous passivity. So, start writing whatever you write, whatever you read. You may probably take a small summary or kind of a keyword summary into your paper rather than highlighting the part. The second advice that mark up the margins of your text with words, ideas that occur to you, notes about things that seems important to you, and of course remembers how issue in a text may connect with your research question and objectives, because this kind of interaction keeps you conscious of the reason you are reading. Because so throughout your research, this annotation will be useful memory trigger. So it means that you need to mark up the margins in your text and with words, ideas, and concepts. Of course, you also need to develop your own symbol system. Some students use asterisks, some students use another symbol, because asterisk a key idea, for example, or use an exclamation point for the surprising or absurd or bizarre information, like your margin words. Your hieroglyphs can help you to reconstruct the important observations that you made at an early time. They are very important when you return to a text later in the term in search of a particular passage that you may want to include in your project report. You know exactly where you're going to go and then pick them. So it's always good to develop your own symbol system that would be easy to remember and then easy to pick when you go back and then start writing. Remember, sometimes you may read hours and hours, and after completing that, if you want to go back and write, if you don't put some sort of symbols or some sort of a shortcut, then you will probably go back and have to do from scratch. So it's important to develop your own symbol while you are. Of course, you have to get in the habit of hearing yourself ask questions. What does this mean? Why is he or she drawing that conclusions? Because you have to write questions down in your margins at the beginning or the end of reading or in a notebook, because they are reminder of the unfinished business. You still have a text to come in terms with your own, and once you have had a chance to digest the material further or have done further reading, so those questions sparks idea. And if you ask questions, what was the reason why these researchers said or wrote this, then your mind started asking or kind of constructing answer for your understanding. So it's important that you also need to ask questions while you are reading. Annotating is the second steps from the four step advice that we picked from Harvard School. It is conducting a dialogue with yourself, the author, and the issue and the idea at stake. Means that now the first step is you read, you mark part of the information you want to take into your research, and the second question is that you're going to annotate. And when you annotate, then you will ask a number of questions to yourself, to the researcher, and through this dialogue, you will have a clear idea of what you're gonna do and then how you're gonna do. So there are about 5 questions that you really need to ask yourself when you are annotating. The first one is, have you ensured that the literature covered relates clearly to your research questions and objectives? So this is key. Sometimes you may read one full day, and when you are ready to annotate or write, then you'll find that whatever you read has literal relevance to your research. So it's important to have these 4 checkpoints next to your writing to make sure that what you are doing is actually okay. The second question you need to ask is, have you covered the most relevant and significant theories of recognized experts in the area? It's another important question. Theories. They are the foundation for your research, and they help you understand why one research needs to be conducted in one form or another, or how the previous researchers conducted or connected the dots. Have you ever covered the most relevant and significant literature, or at least a representative sample? When you go out to those databases and enter certain keywords, you may find hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed journals specifically on one particular keyword, and it's important to narrow down and find the most appropriate area for your research. So that's why you need to cover the most relevant and significant literature. Have you included up-to-date literature? Oftentimes you may find the literature, but when you go in and see when the date that literature was published, you may find that it's like 10, 15, 20 years old. The issue with that is, in this fast moving economy, knowledge is created almost every 18 months, and whatever you found 10 years ago may not be appropriate or may not be relevant. So usually the rule of thumb is that you need to pick the last 5 years research work, because the closer you are to the year, then probably the up to date your research finding or your research reading would be. And then the last one is, have you referenced all the literature used in the format prescribed in the assessment criteria? Means that use some sort of assessment criteria to check whether the literature you are reading fulfills those assessments. It's always good to have those checkpoints to make sure that you get everything you want while you're annotating the literature you are about to read and then write. The third steps in the recommendation is outline, summarize, and analyze your literature material or literature review. Means that you have to take the information apart, look at its parts, and then try to put it back together again in a language that is meaningful to you. Means that rewrite or paraphrase it with your own understanding. The best way to determine that you really got the point is to be able to state in your own words. I think that's the challenge for many students to rewrite what they read in their literature. So outlining the argument of a text is part of annotating, and can be done quite informally in the margin of the text, unless you prefer the more formal Roman numeral model that you may have learned in high school. But outlines enables you, the researcher see the skeleton of an argument, the thesis, the first point and evidence through the conclusion. With weighty or difficult readings, that skeleton may not be obvious until you get looking for it. So it's always good to outline the content of the literature with your own understanding, with the the major component, the subcomponent. Then when you start writing, then you will have a better idea of what what the content or the big picture is. Summarizing, of course, accomplishes something similar, but in a sentence and paragraph form, in which the connection between ideas are made explicit. So you summarized what you wrote or what you read. So usually, on the average, you may find between 20 to 25 pages of peer review journal article, and you're expected to summarize it in probably one or two paragraphs. So doing that means that outline, summarizing, and analyzing are like the three critical steps on successfully deploying or successfully writing your annotated bibliography. And of course, analyzing is an evaluation of, or it adds an evaluative component to the summarizing process. Analyzing requires you not just to restate the main idea, but also to test the logic, its credibility, and an emotional impact of an argument. Because during the analysis of your text, you reflect upon and decide how effectively or not effectively its argument has been made. So in this stage, when you analyze an article, there are a couple of questions that you need to raise. Um, for example, what is the writer assessing? What is he or she try to convey a message? What am I being asked to believe or accept? The fact, the opinion, or some mixture? What reasons or evidence does the author supply to convince me, means the reader, where is the strongest and the more effective evidence the author offers, and why it's compelling? So these are like three or four critical questions that you have to ask when you are reading peer review journals, and especially when you are trying to analyze, because at the end of the day, what matters is how you understood the content, the methodology, the research questions, the hypothesis, and what are the connection that research, this research outcome make, to connect between the problem and the solution. So it's important to outline, summarize, and analyze your literature. Of course, you have to also look for repetitions and patterns. If you read articles published by particular individuals, and after getting through the third or the fourth articles, you may probably find the pattern, how they describe the problem statement, how they formulate their research questions, how they try to link the theoretical framework with the actual problem. So the way language is chosen or used or positioned in a text can be an important indication of what the author considers critical and what he or she expects you to glean from his argument. It also can alert you to the ideological position, the hidden agendas or biases. So it's always good to pay attention for the recurring image, for repeating words, phrases, or types of examples or illustrations, or see for its consistent way of characterizing people, events, or issues. So the biggest challenge, one of the challenges for a novice researcher is to kind of identify the signals from the noise, and be able to see or read through the line and understand what is the message, or the message that article is conveying. So it's that's also one form of the critical thinking skills that you develop while you are reading your literature review. Conceptualization is the other steps that help researchers to see the big picture, to paint the picture, or to imagine the the concept of this research. Because once you finished reading actively and annotating, take stock for a moment and put it in perspective. Means that rewrite it or rerun it with your own imagination or with your own understanding. Because when you contextualize, you essentially review a text you have encountered, framed by its historical, cultural, material, or intellectual circumstances. Means that you may ask that when was it written, or where was it published. Do these factors change or otherwise influence how you view a pieces? And how is the implication accepted by the body of knowledge in the area where you will be working your research? So it's also important to view the reading through the lens of your own experience, your understanding of the words on the page, and then their significance is always shaped by what you have come to know and value from living in a particular time and place. So conceptualization is a very powerful, it's a powerful concept where you got your article, you went through the whole process of previewing and annotating, outlining, summarizing, and analyzing, and then finally, you also went through for repetition and patterns, and you contextualize what you read, and then the flow will be pretty much structured well, because if you put that into your own imagination, into your own world, I think you will have a better chance of rewriting or expressing what you read. And this is also a challenge for many students, especially students who've never been exposed to the different ways of critical thinking, or thinking out of the box, or using the Bloom's taxonomy of critical thinking. During this conceptualization and contextualization, or going to comparing and contrasting of your research, you may answer a couple of questions you pose at the beginning of your research. For example, you may ask that, whether have you shown how your research questions relate to previous research reviewed, because you already now reviewed your a couple of research articles, and you may probably see how your questions relates to the past search. Have you assessed the strengths and weakness of the previous research reviewed? That's where the contextualization and the evaluation comes in place. Have you been objective in your decision and assessment to others people research? Because look for that pattern, see the repeated words, the phrases. These are all what we discussed in the previous slides. And have you include reference to research that is counter to your own opinion? Because you don't necessarily go to read articles that pretty much tally with your idea, I think it's also good to see a contrasting view for your research, because if you don't see the other side of the argument, then your argument may be weak, or you may not be able to convince your research advisors or who is reading about your research. So it's always good to have the counter opinion, and then kind of see what's the ground for their argument. You may ask also, how you distinguish clearly between facts and opinion. I think that's where the comparing and contrasting part comes. Have you made reasoned judgments about the value and relevance of others' research to your own? It's just like coming home and revisit what are the ideas and the concepts you put together before you go on that research endeavor. So it's always good to do a reasoning judgment about the value and relevance. Have you justified clearly your own ideas? Because once you read 3, 4, 5 literatures, or peer review journals or books in the area where you are planning to work, then you'll have clear idea whether you are on the right track, or whether you need some adjustments, or you need to pretty much rewrite what you wrote at the beginning. The other question is, have you highlighted those ideas or the area where new research or yours is needed to provide fresh insights, and taken this into account in your argument? Instead, remember, at the end of the day, at the end of your research, however small the contribution is, your research is expected to add knowledge, or to add new insight to the body of knowledge in your area. So it's always good to go back and then check what the original intention of your research. Especially in particular, where are some inconsistencies in current knowledge and understandings, where there are omissions or bias in published research, whether your research findings need to be tested further, whether evidence is lacking or inconclusive, contradictory, or limited, and of course, how you justify your argument by referencing the currently or published research. So these are the kind of steps or the checklist for evaluating whether your literature review is critical or not. So, in conclusion, you may say that there may be many ways of doing literature review, or conducting your research, or going and dig into those databases with millions of peer-reviewed journal articles, the current status, or any of those knowledge bases. And again, the question is whether it's if there is a single way of getting into your literature review or not. The answer is there is no. You may find one way that fits your area, and another student may do another one. But the common sense is that although there is no single structure that your critical review should take, it could be a different variation. Students have found it useful to think of the review as a funnel, in which one starts at the more general level before narrowing down to your specific research questions and objectives. So start with like a 10,000 feet overview of what you're about to do, and then what are the concepts, the scopes, and the depth of your research, and provide a brief overview of key ideas and themes. That's another important recommendations. And summarize, compare, and contrast the research of the key writers. Means that you may narrow down to 5, 6 articles, and you start summarizing. Narrow down to highlights previous research work most relevant. this is what I see issue with student, that they are all over the map, and at the end of the day, the content of the articles may attract them, and they may go and start working. But the problem is, they realize that what they're supposed to do is to find out the research work that is relevant to their own research. Of course, you have to provide a detailed account of the findings of this research and show how those research are related to your own. Of course, you have to highlight those aspects where your own research will provide fresh insights, means that see the gap, imagine how your research will contribute or will fill the gap, or the knowledge gap or the literature gap between what is published now and then what your researcher will add. And finally, you lead the reader into a subsequent section of your project report which explore those issues. So when we summarize this lecture, one of the unknown chapters in your research, from introduction, literature review, research methods, data collection analysis, conclusions and recommendations, chapter 2, which is the literature review, is it's the unknown part, because you don't know what type of literature you'll be reviewing, how the composition of your literature review looks like, and what strategy you're going to use, and whether you will find the right information, whether you are on the right track. So it's kind of a complex area where students spend months and months, especially in the PhD program, where they have to go through piles of information and materials to find out those small dots, so that those dots will help them down the road to substantiate or to support their research. So it's a challenging part. At the same time, it's an exciting chapter for your dissertation or for your research thesis, and that's why it's called literature review. That's why it's complicated, and it's also time consuming. All right, okay, so we're going to conclude the lit review part of the lecture here. If you have any questions, you let me know. I'm sure you have a plethora of information available about how to conduct a lit review, and how to do annotated bibliography, how to compare and contrast, how to analyze, synthesize, and using all the highest forms of thinking. So remember, go back and review your material, and also read supplementary documents before you start your lecture. All right, thank you so much for